Hello, 7th and 8th grade, and we are continuing with Chapter 22, Troubled Times for America. We're starting on note 50 today. Okay, let's see, here we go. Nixon, with his first term in office, promised to get America out of Vietnam by training the South Vietnamese to fight for themselves. The whole point of this was not to just remove American troops immediately and then leave the South Vietnamese to just be trampled by the North Vietnamese, but to train them up so that they could actually defend themselves. This was really important as a military strategy because we had seen what happened in the past. We've seen what happens in the past when an ally pulls out and just leaves people undefended. So he really wanted to make sure that the South was able to fight for itself. In 1969, Nixon did begin withdrawing American troops from South Vietnam. You can see on this Time magazine cover, you can see soldiers getting ready to go home. Continuing that withdrawal was really important to the American people. We wanted to be out of Vietnam. It was a long, very difficult war emotionally and mentally for our soldiers. It was hard for the people who were left behind in the United States, having fathers and children going over to Vietnam to fight. It was a very emotional and very dark time for American history. His war strategy was Vietnamization, which is a policy to end U.S. involvement in the war. He wanted to shift the burden of the war to the South Vietnamese. He promised the public a de-escalation of the war, that we would help out less and less as the South Vietnamese took over. That helped him to win re-election in 1968. And then he privately promised South Vietnam that he would escalate the conflict as a way to finish the war very quickly before we withdrew. That was something that people looked at and they said, okay, he broke his promise to the American people. On paper, yes, he did. That was found in the Pentagon Papers. The New York Times did find out about that, and the U.S. citizens began to mistrust the U.S. government. The U.S. government is always in a position where it's very easy to mistrust them because they have so much power over people's lives. Everything from sending troops to foreign countries to how our prices are affected in the grocery store. The federal government does have quite a lot of power. On April 1970, Nixon ordered American troops into Cambodia to destroy communist bases there. He did this not really on the up and up, not publicly at first. He was found out and then he came forward. But he's going to be accused of trying to prolong the war because of this. But he sent troops into Cambodia in the first place to destroy the communist bases that were helping to provide goods and services, materials to the North Vietnamese. So he was looking to cut supply lines before he pulled troops out of South Korea. The Vietnam War protesters accused the president of going back on his promise to get troops out of Southeast Asia. They said that there was a rights violation in Cambodia. They believed that the United States was taking the war to Cambodia. That is not what was happening. It was really about cutting those supply lines to North Vietnam. But unfortunately, a lot of the Vietnam War protesters were really on the side of North Vietnam rather than South Vietnam when you looked overall at what they were protesting. Many of them believed in communism and wanted to see it take over South Vietnam as well. There were angry and violent demonstrations on college campuses. And remember, we talked last time a little bit about a lot of college students and teachers were actually promoting the ideas of communism and socialism. They were looking at this as a way to change the way government was in America. They didn't like the way it was going on. And as a result, they kind of took these very abstract ideas of communism and socialism where everybody is treated equally according to those books, like the Communist Manifesto. Everyone is treated equally. You take out the entire top 1% of the population. And by taking out, they do mean murder, kill, and taking all of their stuff and redistributing that wealth. Now, that's in communism. In socialism, they try to do it through taxation and redistribution of wealth that way. But we had a lot of college students and a lot of teachers who were really promoting the ideas of communism. And so when the US government and the president specifically were sending troops into other communist nations to stop communist supply lines, there were angry demonstrations on college campuses, and that led to the death of 4 students in Kent State University and at Jackson State College in Mississippi when the National Guard had to go and break up these riots. The death in Kent State was later discovered to be an accident. It was a legitimate mistake where one of the soldiers, the National Guard guns did not have rubber bullets. Instead, it had live ammunition in it. So it wasn't meant to kill, but still, it was a horrible, horrible tragedy. We don't want to downplay the tragedy. Somebody lost their child. They lost several children, 4 students at Kent State. There was a ceasefire in Vietnam declared in January of 1973. The idea was that accord was reached. That means peace was reached. A ceasefire begins on Saturday, and then POWs, those are prisoners of war, were to be free in 60 days. Now that was on the side, both sides. Okay, any North Vietnamese that were captured by the South Vietnamese or by the United States were to be freed. Anybody from South Vietnam or the United States was to be freed from North Vietnam. The big problem we had was that North Vietnam did not release all of the prisoners. And in fact, they didn't have they didn't have paper record of most of the prisoners. And so all of our prisoners did not come back from Vietnam. And that has been a sore point of contention ever since. So communists agreed to return all American prisoners of war. However, it was doubtful that all were returned. Many MIAs, that's missing in action, were never accounted for. Sometimes you will see this flag outside of businesses that support veterans. It's POW MIA. That POW is prison of war, MIA, missing in action, to say that we haven't forgotten our soldiers that are still or were left behind. It's very unlikely that any of them are still alive today. There's always sadly hope that they're still alive. But this idea that so many men were left behind ended up hitting popular culture very hard in the 1980s with movies like First Blood, Rambo, and I believe there was one called Missing in Action, Chuck Norris film. They're very bloody films, but they're action involved, and they're all about reclaiming our POWs. In fact, A-Team, when it was first released as a TV show, was all about men who wanted to reclaim MIAs and people who they went into in later seasons. If you've ever watched the A-Team TV show, and that's something you can watch with your parents, the first one's a little cringy, but after that they become a lot more family friendly. But the A-Team really was all about veterans from the Vietnam War. It's worth watching. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial commemorates all of the dead and missing soldiers by name. So when we say they weren't forgotten, that those aren't empty words, they really were remembered by name. And at the opening of this Vietnam War memorial, when it was designed and chosen, and the original reaction was anger. People didn't think it was as fancy as other memorials, but when the Vietnam vets saw it, they liked it. It was everything. Because even though these are just simple stone slabs, they are engraved with the names of our soldiers who died or went missing in Vietnam. And that's everything. It wasn't emotional because of a statue. It wasn't emotional because of, impressive artwork. It was simply the names of people we've lost. Without American support, what happened was exactly what our military expected to happen. South Vietnam fell very quickly to communists, and they quickly extended their control to Cambodia and Laos, which had been part of their supply line. and it's going to cause problems in those two countries as well. Sorry, I hate war. In Cambodia, communists sought to destroy families and private property. That is the pattern of communism that doesn't really get taught in a concrete way in many history classes. Usually it's done very abstractly, like it's just an idea. But that idea that was brought out by Marx in his Communist Manifesto, when it is applied, it is horrific. It is absolutely horrific. The idea is that you take out an entire portion of your population. Everybody who makes a lot of money gets completely destroyed. And by that, I mean they're either killed, executed, or they are removed from their positions of power. All of their property is redistributed to everybody else. Communism does not believe in strong family units. They believe that everyone belongs to the state. So family units were destroyed. It doesn't matter if you have a mother and a father and children. The children and the families are and the parents are separated. There is no belief in private property. They believe that private property has caused all the evils in the world. I can guarantee you that's not true. Communism has done a lot more evil in this world than private property ever did. They ended up murdering in Cambodia 2.5 million men, women, and children. Now, this tree that you see here, all of these little fabric loops are given in remembrance of people who actually died on this tree. You can see that they have in the Cambodian language, and then under it in English for people who travel to Cambodia. This is the killing tree. And the way it is presented, it's the tree against which executioners beat children. They didn't tie children to the tree and whip them. That's not what this tree was about. This was a killing tree. They swung children by the feet to the tree and bashed their heads open. That's what the killing tree is. This right here is communism. And we need to remember that, because today we have college students and college professors who are promoting communism as if it is a good thing. We had, until yesterday, a presidential candidate who is promoting communism. And one of his platforms was to remove goods from and property from people who are in the top 1% of our society and redistribute that wealth. That was what he was promoting, and people were saying, yes, let's do that, without taking into account that this is the next step. Here we have a picture of a rich peasant. A peasant is just someone who's tied to their land. He was shot for having exploited the peasantry because he made a profit on his crop. This is called the killing fields. Now, this is many years later when the killing fields became sodded over and grass started growing naturally, but you can see all the lumps and bumps. It's not a flat field. That's because under all of these lumps and bumps are bodies. This is where people were just allowed to die and then earth pushed over them. The Cambodians, so they could save on bullets, they just fenced in large portions of land, pushed the peasants onto that land, and then allowed them to starve to death. So they could wander. They could not escape. If they tried to escape, then they would be killed or tortured. But they would just starve until they dropped, and then they were just buried. So in the killing fields, we have mass graves. There are 86 mass graves. That just means that people are buried all together in one big hole. And there were 8,985 victims. We need to remember what happened. This is why we need to study history, so we understand what communism is and what it does to people. This is what we need to understand and appreciate and go with. Okay. Back in the United States, there was a legitimate complaint being addressed, and it was addressed in the 26th Amendment. In a Vietnam War, the average age of a soldier was 19 years old, which meant that he was old enough to go fight, but he wasn't old enough to vote for the government for which he was fighting. So the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age from 21 years to 18 years of age, so that if you are old enough to fight, you're old enough to vote. 18 years of age is your age of really adulthood. That's when you graduate from college or from high school. It's when you go and you apply for the draft. 18 years after you graduate, you can go get your house. You can go get a place of your own. You can drive your car anywhere you want to. You are an adult for all intents and purposes at 18. Okay, so Henry Kissinger was the national security advisor under Nixon. National security means to protect the United States. That's really what national security is. He is the one who negotiated a ceasefire in Vietnam. And he also encouraged the United States to shake hands and make nice with the Russians. So this word that is used to meaning relax tensions is détente. So the idea that both the United States and Russia had nuclear capability, but that we were going to agree not to use those weapons if that meant, we could live with a kind of an uncomfortable peace. We didn't want to kill each other because we didn't want to kill ourselves. Unfortunately, the détente is going to be used unilaterally, this relaxing of tensions, even when it shouldn't have been. For Russia, such a big country, and could we actually get along with them? Yeah, we could. But there's going to be another issue here later on where détente is applied where it really shouldn't have been because we ended up betraying one of our allies. But starting with the SALT Treaty. Nixon and Kissinger agreed to the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks Treaty with the Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev. Under this treaty, both countries agreed to limit production of nuclear arms. It means they wouldn't be making new nuclear arms, or at least they would limit how many they were going to make. And of course, as usual, the USSR did not keep their part of the treaty. That was a common thing between the United States and Russia, or with the USSR. Russia was head of the USSR. USSR was a collection of all the Soviets that were being controlled by Russia. A Soviet is kind of like a state, okay? But the USSR did not keep the treaty. The United States did. In February of 1972, President Nixon visited communist China and set the stage for future relations, trade, and military planning with that nation. So here he is visiting China. He's on the Great Wall. But communist China had gone through what is called the Cultural Revolution. They went through several of them, actually, where many people were killed. Millions of people were killed in the name of communism, especially those who were well-educated, those who had built businesses. They were taken out from society. Sometimes they were just forced to do manual labor, especially those who were well-educated. Doctors, lawyers, teachers were taken out into the streets and either tortured or killed or forced into manual labor. The Communist Party did not appreciate people who used their brains. Now, this is where the betrayal comes in. To please China, the United States abandoned their very close allies, the Free Chinese of Taiwan. This is the second time that the people of China who were living in Taiwan were abandoned or betrayed by the United States. The first time was with Truman, when he refused to help the Free Chinese, the nationalist Chinese, in their fight against communism, and they had to flee to the nearby island of Taiwan. And this is the second time where the Taiwanese people were basically left the Chinese people in Taiwan were left without friends from the United States. The majority of people in the United States appreciate the people of Taiwan. They love the Chinese people of Taiwan. Many of our Chinese immigrants today have come from Taiwan, as well as from mainland China. But the truth is, this is an embarrassing part of American history, that we just so easily betrayed the people that we were allied to. And this is Taiwan today. They have a very small island, but they are rich in trade. They understand trade, and they have become one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Thank you for their incredible strength and encouragement to the rest of the world, for people who really want to do what's right, despite the fact that they have been betrayed by some of their best friends. June 1967, because we're jumping over that timeline again, we are going to talk a little bit about what happened in Israel during this time. Egypt, Jordan, and Syria all attacked Israel at the same time, looking to wipe Israel off the map. Israel had been established by the United Nations, and specifically the land given to the people of Israel by England, who owned it at the time. The people who lived in Jordan called themselves Jordanians. They encouraged people from Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, all encouraged their very poorest people to move to the new country of Israel as soon as it was established, and to declare themselves to be immigrants from these other countries, and to start calling themselves Palestinians, because that was the generalized name given to this area back in ancient times. I mean, this was way before Christ. You had the Palestinian piece of land, but they started calling themselves Palestinians for the first time after Israel was established. Israel won a strong victory in the Six-Day War that captured the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank of Jordan, and the Golan Heights. Now, even though they were being attacked by much larger countries, they had better equipment and they had more of a fighting spirit, and they were able to win. Now, the Arabs who were fighting against them, they turned to the enemy of the United States, which was the Soviet Union. They wanted more arms, and the U.S. responded by sending weapons to Israel. There was a second war that took place on October 6, 1973, when Egypt, Syria, and Jordan again attacked Israel, this time with Soviet weapons. And the Arabs showed their contempt for the Jews by attacking on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. This was a day of fasting and self-reflection and confession of sin. And when the Jews were attacked on this holy day, they went out and fought. The Arabs didn't think they would fight on that holy day, but they were being led by a prime minister named Golda Meir. That is her in the top picture there. And she was considered really like a mother in Israel, much like Deborah had been in the Old Testament. And she said, look, we're fighting for our lives here. I know it's a holiday. God will understand. And of course he did. In the Yom Kippur War, the Israelis drove the Egyptians back and prepared to invade Egypt. So they not only conquered the land that Egypt had tried to control, they pushed all the way back into Egypt proper and prepared to invade that country itself. At that point, Henry Kissinger, the United States Secretary for National Defense, stepped forward and said, it's time for us to arrange a truce. We can't let Israel take over Egypt. So he arranged for a truce. The UN sent forces to patrol the borders between Egypt and Israel. Keep in mind that Israel did not start the fight, but they were looking to end it. It wasn't started by Israel. This war was started by Egypt and its allied nations. But the people in the Middle East have twisted history in such a way as to make it sound like Israel is the bad guy. and a really bad guy. They look at Israel as being an apartheid nation. Apartheid means that you do not have, that one group of people doesn't have the same rights as everybody else. But the truth is, when you look at Israel's laws, they are a free nation. So if you are an Arab person living in Israel, you have all the same rights that a person from Israel, a citizen of Israel, has. You have the same rights. You are considered a citizen in the country of Israel if you were born there, if you were naturalized there. Everybody has the same rights. It is the freest place in the Middle East. OPEC. This is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and it was a monopoly designed to control oil and the supply and the price of oil in all of these nations. Nobody in these nations would sell their oil for less than anybody else. The whole purpose of this organization, the whole purpose of this organization was to control that supply and the price of oil to keep people from getting a break. They wanted to raise as much money as possible for their organization. In the United States, when this was done, they called it a trust, and it was eventually broken up by the U.S. government. But this doesn't have anything to do with U.S. government. This is not our business. This is the business of these different countries. Okay, so in 1973, the United States, because we rushed to Israel's defense against the Arab aggressor in the Yom Kippur War, OPEC, this monopoly, cut off all of this oil exports to the United States. Now, what you need to know about this time is our president at the time was trying to get people away from oil. He wanted to encourage people to go with solar power, which was incredibly expensive, very clunky, and it didn't address issues of like machineries like cars, okay? So when oil was cut off, our president at the time had already slowed down production of oil in the United States. And so we didn't have enough oil that we were producing to actually provide for ourselves. We had become dependent on imported oil. And so as a result, we started to have an oil crisis and a gas crisis. So all over the United States in 1973, people were making plans to go to their gas stations on specific days because gas was being rationed. So you'll see here on this flag, when there was actual gas available at the gas station, the gas station would put up a green flag. When there was only enough for commercial, that means business cars and trucks, a yellow flag would be put up. If there was a red flag, that means there was no gas available and the gas station was closed. Okay, that Arab oil embargo sent American economy into a very serious recession. OPEC had raised the price of oil from $2 to $11 a barrel. That is a huge jump. And because that is the price for crude oil, so the barrel of oil had to then be refined, and that all of that adds to the price and to the cost of the oil. Okay, we're going to stop right there today. I'm stopping just a little bit early because I have to jump on a call with my fellow teachers. But this is good enough for today. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you again on Monday with some more lectures.